Okay, so we're gonna go over routes in React and using third-party APIs. Share my screen. All right, so I've got this, my React app set up. I haven't done anything yet. So it's called Articles. So basically this is just gonna be a very bare bones implementation of like a new site like thing. So we're gonna have we're gonna have like a homepage route, which is just gonna have nothing, kind of like a blank view, but that could be, use your imagination there. And then we're gonna have a list view, which will show a bunch of articles, and then also a detail view, which will, show one particular article detail. So we're just gonna have three routes, basically, like a home page or like a default page, a list page where you see everything, and then an individual article page. Okay, so here I am at the very beginning doing create React app. So I've got nothing going on. I'm gonna go ahead and delete this. I saw someone wrote a script for cleaning up some of the boilerplate. That's cool. I haven't tried it, but that's a nice gift for everyone. So I'm going to start off. When I'm developing, I like to just throw in a bunch of H1 tags just so I know I can see visually, what's on the app, because as you know, the structure of a React app is not necessarily obvious from how it looks. So you can use the developer tools, which are good. And also, I think just throwing in some, at least initially, just labeling everything. So this will be, let's see. All right, so I've got that. And let me run this, npm start. Okay, so I've got app, very exciting. Let's get the dev tools up. Okay, nothing going on. So I know I'm gonna have a few things. I'm gonna have a home page. I'm gonna have a detail view and a list view at least. We can build from there. So create a components folder, create a pages folder. I'm just gonna put everything in components for right now. So things I'm gonna have: a home page, a list view, detail. Let's see. Yeah, I think that should be good for now. If we need more, we can come to it. So I'm gonna do some boilerplate here. So homepage. I'm gonna do all this functionally, by the way. If anyone wants me to go back and do it with class-based components, I can do that. I can do that later, but I'm just gonna do all this functionally. So const homepage. Export it. I can also just export it here. I have to do that. Export default. Does anyone know the syntax for doing this on the same line? All right, I'll worry about that later. So export default. Okay, so I need a return statement that is going to return some JSX. And I'll just put a dummy value here. All right, and then in app, I'm going to render the home page. And that auto imported for me, so that's very nice. Let's take a look at it, and it looks like that is working. Okay, and then we can also do a list view. Let me think here. Yeah, let's go ahead and we'll do the routes now. So we could do this either way. We could build out all the components first and then do the routes, but we'll just knock the routes out first. So to handle routing, I'm going to use the standard third-party library, which is React Router DOM. So I'm going to have to import that. So npm install okay, relatively quick import there.
Is that the virtual DOM? Is that what that's referring to?
This actually it's not DOM, is it? I mean, sorry. React Router DOM. Let me install this just to make sure. Let me check my so if I want to know what version I just installed, I could take a look at the package JSON and React Router DOM 6. So that should be fine. The docs say to specify 6. This is probably when it just came out. So the does the DOM here refer to the virtual DOM? I'm not sure. So the way that React itself is structured is that has a kind of an in-memory model of the DOM, which it will reconcile efficiently with the actual DOM. So that's one of the reasons people use React. It updates the DOM more efficiently. So React has some good and bad things. I think the way it constructs components and things like this is actually really nice. But there's a lot of, as you've seen, I'm sure, the dependencies, it's just a huge mess, and every week it goes out of date. So it's definitely hard to manage, but one of the reasons people put up with that is because the DOM manipulation is so efficient. Okay, so I've got the homepage here. I've got my React Router third-party dependency going. So what I need to do now is, the way React Router works is it basically creates wrapper components. So we're essentially going to wrap whatever parts of our application we want to be, we want to react to what's happening in the URL bar. So in some sense, React Router is fake. It's not like I'm not going to a new route, making a new request, and getting a new HTML document. So the classic the classic structure for websites before was I go to home, whatever, like example.com/home, and that translates into a request to a server, and that server, whatever its base file structure is, goes to, okay, let me go to /home and then give you back whatever HTML document I have there. And then if you go to /home/favorites or whatever, then it makes another request to the server, and the server goes, looks up in its own file structure /home/favorites or whatever, and then serves up a new HTML document. So every time you make a request to a different endpoint, you're making a new request to the server, and you're fetching a new document. But React is basically designed to be a single page app. So ideally, you're not making actual requests. So if you change what's in your, what's here, so if I go to /home or whatever, I think I have this turned off, but it's not actually making a new request. Let me restart this. Okay, so we can think of this as just like reacting to a change. So it's almost like in event listener or something. So if someone changes something in the URL bar here, then I want my application to react to it. And the way you do that is whatever you want to react is you wrap that in a browser router. So there's a little bit of boilerplate for using React Router. So import browser router. So this is the outermost component. And then there's also something called routes. And then finally, there's individual routes. So we'll see this is kind of the browser router and routes is basically like boilerplate. And then the route is kind of what we're individually going to use here. Okay, so I've imported these three things. So now I can use them. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually, let me create a nav component as well. We'll create a nav component, which will basically always be displaying, and then everything below the nav component can be changeable. But I'll keep the nav component always displayed. So again, this is a common pattern that you'll see, especially now. We have like a nested structure, and the stuff on the outside will not change at all or rarely change, and then you're really just like changing individual things in the middle. And you're changing all that stuff, but you're not making a brand new request to a server every time you change, some small detail on the page. Okay, so let's create a nav component, which is just going to be a dummy component basically. So here, if you have this extension, I'm not even sure what extension is, some kind of React extension, then you get these snippets. So FCC, some kind of functional component. So this just can cut down a little bit of typing. I'll call it nav. And I'll return. This is just going to kind of represent the nav bar. Can modify that later maybe. Okay, so instead of that, I'm going to render the nav component. I have to import that. Did I not export this? I did. Okay, from I'm not sure if there's any kind of, has anyone noticed any patterns to when VS Code will like auto pick up and import? It seems a little random to me, but I haven't really tried systematically figuring it out. Okay. All right, so here we go. We now see our notional nav bar and the home page. Okay, so everything below the nav bar, I'm going to wrap in a browser router. And the thing is, I can't just throw in my component now. I kind of have to follow the rules. So it's inside of browser router, I'm going to have routes. And then inside of routes, I'm going to have my individual routes.
Is this always in app.js?
It doesn't have to be. So it kind of just depends on where you want to do it. You could also do it, at the very top level. So you could put it here. App.js is kind of, I think, a reasonable place to do it. You could also do it farther down in the hierarchy if you just want, maybe you just want some particular part of your application to have routes and the rest of it not. So you can really put this wherever, but I would say a sensible default is probably somewhere in app. So we can look at the documentation where we have React router. So configuring routes, you can see that browser router, routes, and route. And if you just look at the structure here, you have browser router on the outside. So here in this example, this is actually being done at the very top level. So in index.js. So the documentation example does it there. So you have browser router and then routes. Again, this is just boilerplate setup. And then what we actually care about is an individual route. And if you note here, you can actually nest routes. So I'm not going to do that right now, but it's basically, this is like, if I go to slash, I will render app. If I go to teams, I'm going to render teams, but if I go to teams, so notice that nested under teams is this team ID. So if I go to teams/5, it's going to render team, but so, right, so teams plural. And if I go to teams/5, it's going to render an individual team.
So
you can also just, sorry, go ahead.
It's somewhat equivalent to views.py, like if we're working with Django, but you said it's all happening in the front end and there's no network requests.
Yeah.
It's just kind of tracking what's happening in the URL bar.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you compare it to Django, it's in some ways React kind of mushes everything together in some ways. So this your routes would be like your URLs, and then the view function that gets called is basically like your component here. And then the component itself, of course, is like a combination of view and the HTML.
I got a question on that.
Sure.
So if it's not serving these individual component files up like as they're navigated to, it seems like you run into like an issue of having just too much for the website to load initially.
Yeah. Yeah.
How
so
do you handle that?
That's a great question. So I think, so I am not an expert in this. I haven't dealt with like, high scale production quality React app, but I think there are a few ways around that. One, I think, is partially loading. There's also something called server side rendering. So you can basically load part of an app in chunks. So at the initial request, I can load enough to get, what I think most people are going to use. And then if you click somewhere else, I can re-request, or I can kind of do an initial request and get most of it and then do another request later. There's also like web workers and caching stuff. So the first time you visit might be a little longer to load, but the next time will be a lot faster. So there's all kinds of techniques for dealing with that.
I just put a link in the chat to an article from a book Juan shared with me, and it covers Web Apps 101, and it goes over server-side and client-side routing or rendering, and how all that works and why.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. Okay. Okay. So our app, now we want to handle routes. So we want our first route. Let's just do a default thing. So the route, we'll do slash, and that's going to render the home page. So I'm going to make this a self-closing tag and element. Element we're going to render is, let's do homepage. And then the first thing is path. Okay, so this should look identical to what we had before. It's just gonna, because I'm at /home, I'm gonna see everything. But if I look in my components, now I've got a whole lot more going on. So we have our browser router, and then router, we have all these providers. So I'm not sure if we might talk a little bit about the context API later, but these components are basically wrappers to handle passing information around. You don't need to worry about it, but it will show up here. So if you have a large app and you start using a bunch of other third-party components and stuff like that, this can get very messy and chaotic very quickly. But the important part here is that at the very bottom, I have homepage. So I can see my homepage is being rendered, and nav, which is always going to be there, is sitting outside of the browser router. Okay, and if I try to go to slash, so I don't have, React is not going to render the homepage component because this didn't match. Okay, so let's add another. So we want to have a list view. We have our nav and our homepage. Okay, so let's start working on an actual component. So list view. I'm gonna add another route. Path will be articles. And then the element, which we haven't created yet, will be okay. And I'm going to use the short, let's see, FFC. This will be and just a dummy thing here. And I'll import it into my app. Okay, so now if I go to articles, I can see my list view there. And if I go back to just slash, I see the home page. Okay, so the route's working, it's rendering the component. All right, so what do you want to do with the list view component? Well, we're gonna make an API call to fetch all the information that we're gonna display from there. So I found this right here. So just a free API, just for the sake of some minor variety, instead of using trusty fake JSON. What is it? JSON. It's the tippy code JSON thing, which is great and I use all the time. But we'll try to mix it up. So this is a free API that doesn't require a key. So that's basically the requirement that I have for this. So we can see the JSON that it gets back. I can't really include query parameters or anything like that, so it's not quite so flexible. There's also no ID, which might be a little issue, but here we can grab title and description. So that'll be good enough for our purposes right now. All right, so when I go to /articles in my application, I want to see a list of articles. or at least like basically like article teasers or links to articles. So what is the pattern for when I render a component, I want it to fetch some data and display that data? This should not be that tricky of a question at this point.
So are you talking about use effect?
Yeah.
And then you use the fetch method.
Okay. So can someone just describe at a high level what I do? So when I go to /list view, I want this list view component to render, and I want it to fetch information from a third-party API and then display that information. So what are the ingredients that I'm going to need? So someone mentioned use effect.
So you got to import that. It's a hook.
Okay.
And so you got to import that at the top. Use effect from React, I believe.
Okay. Am I going to need anything else?
Set state.
Okay. So use state. And then how, you don't have to tell me, you know, all the syntactic details, but how do I use these things to achieve that goal?
So you're going to make a variable from use state and like destructure it. I remember that.
Okay.
Like pull some stuff out of it.
Okay. So what is use state going to, I mean, why do
It's
I?
changing the state of your application. So basically when you're fetching your data using the fetch method, and something changes on the page, use state is kind of the mechanism that's used to do that.
Good. Yeah, exactly. So I know that something is going to change, right? Because I'm starting with, you know, no news articles, and then I want to all of a sudden have a bunch of news articles. So that's a change, which means that those articles, whatever I want to change, is going to have to be in state. So we can set that up right now. So const, again, we'll use the destructuring. So what do we want? Articles. And the function that we're going to use to change those is going to be called set articles and use state. And I'm just going to not get started with some default value, but I'll just leave it blank for now. So how does use effect play into this?
Don't you make a function with it, like arrow function?
Yep. So use effect is a function which takes a function as a parameter. How many parameters does use effect take?
2.
Okay. So can you just tell me about each of those parameters?
So the first one is a block of code of like what will actually fire.
Okay.
And the second one can either specify certain aspects of the page to listen for, or if you put an empty array, it'll, I just know that the presence of an empty array will keep it from endlessly looping and change state, run, and avoiding that situation.
Okay, good. So we'll go ahead and write it out, at least in skeleton form. So use effect, and it's going to take callback function here, which we'll just leave blank for now. And then the second optional parameter is called a dependency array or dependency list. And yeah, as Dan mentioned, if you don't have anything here, So if you just don't have that second parameter, useEffect will get called every single time there's a a potential render triggering change. And a render triggering change is going to be when it initially renders. Anytime the props change or anytime state changes. So if you want useEffect, you want this function to get called basically every time something could possibly change, then you can do that. What we want, the pattern we're going to use here is making an initial API call to load some data. We're going to have a blank, an empty dependency array, which translates to only run useEffect when the component initially is rendered. I can include specific things. So if I include articles here, then useEffect is now basically going to listen for any changes to articles. And if articles changes, then useEffect will rerun. So I can have lots of, if I have 10 different items of state here, and I want to listen to 5 of them, I want to run useEffect on 5 of them, then you can list those 5 here. But the pattern we're dealing with now is just going to be an empty dependency array, at least for now. Okay, so inside of useEffect, I am going to make my network request to that third-party API. So what kind of function am I going to have in order to do that?
Fetch.
Yeah.
Asynchronous.
Yes. So yes, all correct. So I'm going to use the fetch API, which is basically like a convenience function that's built into the browser. That's going to allow me to use promises basically. So I'm going to make a network request and I'm going to get a promise back. So let's write that function. So async function. So if I mark a function with async, what is it going to return?
Promise.
Yeah. So if I mark a function as async, it's going to return a promise. I could also construct a promise manually, but we don't usually do that. Okay, so I'm going to make my initial request. And I'm going to await it because I want to do a couple other things as well later. Fetch. And then I'm going to put in the URL here. And then, so that initial request is basically going to give me the headers back. So I could do things at this point, like check if the, if I got a 200 response or something else, and then I could, have some conditionals and do different things. I'm just basically going to assume that everything's working fine, just for the sake of time. And then to actually get the body, I have to call another asynchronous function. So .json. And then finally, my body is going to have the actual JSON that I need. So once I have that body, let's console log it first, just so we can see what we have. Okay, so I got the list view, and useEffect is going to get called when it initially loads. I have to actually call get articles. This callback function is going to get executed, and then that in turn is going to evaluate this, which will get executed, which is going to execute this, and eventually I should see in the console whatever that JSON is. I'm going to go to /articles, and here is my JSON object. So I have this JSON object, I get a status, so I could check that as well. I'm not going to, but you in practice, you'd want to check that as well. And then articles is what I care about. So articles looks like a list of article objects. So body dot articles. So that will be a list, and then 63. I guess that's fine. Yeah, that'll be fine. So I have these article objects, and now I'm going to do what? So I've my page is loaded. Use effect has run because I have an empty dependency array.
Set articles.
Okay. So I want something on the page to change now that I have this information. So set articles. And we'll do body.articles. Okay. And we change articles. Now we want them to be displayed here. But we can't just display, I mean, we could just stringify JSON and display it, but that would not be a very popular site. So what we're going to do is this initial list view, we probably don't want to display everything. So we'll save, the detail view for the detail view. This list view, I think, should just display a bunch of like teasers, basically. So what I'm going to do is create another component, which will be called teaser. And this will also be, like everything else, a functional component. And this is going to return like a teaser. So we'll do H3. That'll be like a title. And then paragraph. This will be like a summary, I guess we'll call it. And I'm going to have to wrap. So what I have some red squiggly lines here, so something is probably wrong. Does anyone have an idea?
You gotta wrap it.
Yes.
You're returning 2 elements.
Exactly. So I can only return a single thing. So I can, so div is the, common way to do it. There's also React has like a dummy component. So this div is basically just serving as a dummy component. React has something called a fragment. So you can import. So if you don't want to use divs, you can basically use this built-in React component called fragment. It'll effectively do the same thing.
That's just the empty carrots, correct?
Yes. I think you can actually import. I think the empty carrots is probably an alias for the fragment, like the actual fragment component that you can also import.
Okay.
Okay, so I've got, so I know I'm going to need, let's say, title and summary, but I don't have that information here. So how do I get information from my list view to my teaser?
Import it.
Okay, I'm going to have to import it. Where am I here? So it should be in the same level. Okay. So how do I get information from, so my list view component is making this request, it's getting the articles, it's updating my state, and now, yes, props. So I'm gonna have to pass information from list view to teaser as props. So what I'm gonna do right now is I don't just want one teaser, I want a whole bunch of them, and I don't necessarily know how many there's gonna be, so I need to do this dynamically. So I'm gonna write a function which is going to create a bunch of teasers. Okay, and create teasers is, I'll just map over it. So I'm gonna, my articles should be an array. So I'll give this a dummy array to start with. And create teasers, I'm going to go articles.map. And then I'm gonna create a bunch of teasers. So A for article, teaser, and I want two props. I want a title and a summary. So I forget what that was called here. Looks like just maybe, yeah, title, and let's just go with title and description. So title and description. So I don't forget. And I'm calling this title and summary. So I can give it the same name, but I'll do title and summary. Okay. So I have my teasers. I'm going to return that. I'm going to return all of my teaser components. And then here, I can call that create teasers. I got the same problem where now I'm returning two things. I can only return one thing. So wrap it in a div. Okay, title is not defined and summary is not defined. Okay. So if I go here, yeah, it's not rendering at all. So I go to my teaser. So I'm saying title and summary. Why is title and summary not defined?
They're
You haven't
used
dealt
by
with the
their
props yet.
Yeah. So it's not just title or summary, it's props.title, props.summary. And how do I get props?
Pass it in.
Yeah. So I can do props. So I can give it a name here, and then I can do props.title, props.summary. That should work. So this is now displaying everything. If I'm slightly lazy, I can also destructure the props as I'm passing them in. So if props, in this case, it doesn't really matter, but there are times when a component will receive a whole bunch of props that it itself doesn't need. Maybe it just needs a couple, but it has to pass them on to lower components. So you might not want to go through all that trouble. You can, excuse me, you can pull out. So yeah, you can pull out these things by name. So I can do title, summary, and then I can actually just use them directly here. So this is just, you know, slight convenience syntax. You don't have to do that, but it's something you'll commonly see in React. So here are the props, destructured props, title and summary, which I'm passing in here, title and summary, and everything looks like it works.
I have a quick question on that destructuring. Let's say we had more props that we might need later on. Could you use the three dots?
Yeah.
And then that would be available as props dot something else if we needed it.
Yeah. So you could, if this rendered another component, you could pass in rest or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. In this case, we're using everything we're getting, but yeah, that's often the case when you start making bigger apps that sometimes a component just needs to pass things down to another component. And then there are also ways to deal with that. So the context API is one way around that. Actually, this router you see here, it's kind of doing the same thing. You have these provider components. It's basically a way to pass information around without having to like individually, I'm 5 levels down and I'm passing props individually through every component. You can kind of put it into another component called a provider that can directly access a lower level component can directly access. You don't have to worry about that now. That's also, have people heard of Redux?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so Redux kind of does, it's state management, but it basically, it centralizes all of your state. So
Are hooks kind of replacing that in somewhat?
yeah, so there are different hooks that do specific parts of that. Yeah. So you use context hook, it would be the main one. There are also other things. I think like we'll see the use params is kind of similar. We'll see use params in a few minutes. But yeah, so as you know, passing information around is kind of one of the fundamental challenges. So that's why like state management tools like that exist, which are also extremely complicated. So it's never free. Okay, where are we now? We've got our homepage. Let's see, we go back to the top. We have our nav component always rendering no matter what. And then we have our route. So if you go to / whatever, you see the homepage, you go to / articles, you will see this list view component. This list view component will make a third-party API request. It will change state. When state changes, this create teasers will get called, and it's going to return all of these teasers. The teasers themselves are going to be the kind of leaf or the lowest level for now. Okay, so I think our list view is pretty good now. Basically the question is now, what do you do about the detail view? So I think the sensible thing is to somehow make these links. So all of these teasers should be links that will then link to an individual detail view. So in order to do that, I'm going to add a new route just to prepare for that. The path will be, so I could do like a nested route thing. I'm not going to do that right now. Articles / and then I'm going to use this colon is similar to Django, right? It's basically saying whatever goes after here, I want to give it a name, basically. So I'll just call it ID. And then the element. That will be the detail view. Do I have that imported? I do not. I don't actually have it created, so I think I'm getting it there. So I need this. Okay, should be good. So now we have to create the actual detail view. So I'll make it a functional component. And I'll just get a dummy thing going. Okay. All right. So now I should be able to go directly here. So some arbitrary thing after articles, which is going to get picked up. And now I get the detail view. So I think I can just put anything here, actually. It's gonna get picked up. So anything, obviously there's no type, there's no type information in the URL string. So yeah, anything you put after that will get picked up. So in this case, just 3. So we'll make this a number for convenience, but we could make this anything. All right, so we have our detail view here, which is just generic. So we want ultimately our detail view to be populated by a specific article. So we have our teasers. I now want to add a link. So I want to make this title a link to the corresponding detail view. And the way you do that using React Router DOM is there's another component. We have several that we've used already: browser router, browse, and route. There's another one we'll use called link, which is basically just an A tag. So I'm going to import that. So import link from React Router DOM. Oh, this is the wrong component. There we go. And I'm going to just wrap this. Instead of H3, I'm going to make this a link. If I go back here. Okay, so I have an issue. So one thing is that link requires basically where you're going to link it to. So it's called to. And in our case, this is going to be /articles/ something. So I'll just make it 3 for now. We have all of our articles list view, and now the titles are links. So if I hover over them, you can see in the bottom left corner, it's /articles/3. So that's still just a hard-coded dummy value, but these will link to articles 3. And that will render the detail view, which is still just this dummy component right here. So I think we've got the basic wiring hooked up now. So now we need to fill it in with actual information. So this is a little bit tricky. The first thing we have to do is in the detail view, I'm going to refetch all of the information for a particular article, which is going to be a little, let's see. Yeah, this will be a little jerry-rigged because the API doesn't have IDs. Yeah, if I were using the JSON placeholder, this would be a little easier. Let's see. Yeah. Yeah, I think I'll have to jerry-rig it, but that's fine. Okay. So list view, detail view, teaser. All right, so when I get the list view, I'm gonna get all of these articles. One thing I could do potentially to avoid making another API request is save the entire article and then pass that down. So I could get the entire article, and when I render the teaser, I could basically put another prop here that would be the entire component, or just pass that down as a prop itself. So just pass the entire article information into the teaser, and then with a link, you could potentially do something like that, but I also just want to get more exposure to making requests. So we're going to make a fresh request here.
So that's kind of what I meant when I asked earlier, if we passed everything down in the teaser function, we could still pull out the 2 things we need for the teaser and then pass the rest of the article in as a 3-dot notation. So it would all be there.
Yeah. So it would kind of depend on how it's structured. So you'd have to structure it to where the detail view was like a subcomponent of teaser. Or you'd have to use like a context API. The way this is structured right now, that wouldn't really work. We have to tweak a couple things. Because detail view is not being rendered by teaser.
Oh, okay, I see. So it wouldn't pass it on.
Yeah, there are things you can do to get around it, like the context API, or if we restructured it to make detail view, yeah, to make teaser render a detail view. But yeah, so we could do that. That introduces some complications, and also, you know, the focus is on making API calls, so I want to see another example of that. All right, so we have our list view here, teaser. Okay, so we want to link here. And so when we render a detail view, we'll have a certain, you know, a certain pattern in the URL here. So what we want here is to basically get the ID of an article. So this is like a dummy, the stand-in for some kind of ID, whatever would uniquely identify this in the database. So we need to pull that information from the URL, and we can actually do that with a hook. So there's another hook, a functional hook that React Router DOM gives us, which is called use params. Oops, import. Use params from React Router DOM, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to call it. See if we can console log it. So params is actually going to be available to us. We'll actually be able to grab this variable name. So the params object, you can think of it like props. It's something that is going to get passed in this route component. So we can actually grab the ID there. We can do params.id.
Out of curiosity, so it's explained a little bit differently, that use params was allowed you to pull the parameters from the URL.
Yeah.
Are you saying this, is that the same thing you were saying, just different way?
Well, I mean, yeah. So this component is grabbing it from the URL. So the URL doesn't know anything about any structure. So it doesn't know anything about something called ID.
Mm-hmm.
So the router is handling the nitty-gritty details of getting, of basically reading that in, and then some kind of regular expression stuff is happening, and it's pulling off the last part of the URL and wrapping it up in an object called params, which is available to you as this hook, and calling whatever gets passed in dot ID in this case, or whatever else you want to call it. So you don't have it's just you know, wrapping up this stuff for you. So I can see the console log 3. So if I go to 5, I get 5. So React Router is grabbing, and if this were whatever, then this would be whatever. So this is, you know, some magic that you get with React Router DOM. So this is how we're gonna get basically the information we need to make the to make the request. Okay, so if I go from a list view and I click on, did I change that? I didn't change that. So we're gonna have to modify our list view now. So we're gonna have to give them basically IDs. They don't have them, so we're gonna have to create them. So I'm just gonna use an index. That should work fine. I think the second one is index, yes. And then I'll pass another one is an fake ID. So fake ID will get I, and then the teaser, let's see, teaser here. Yes, sorry. So here, instead of hard coding the 3, I'm going to use the ID. So I'm going to do fake ID. So that's available now. So I'm going to use string interpolation. Did not like that for some reason. So we'll
If we
see.
didn't,
Yeah.
if we didn't want to create that ID, could we have just passed in the actual title of the article as since you already have that?
Yeah. Yeah, so we could, yeah. So if this were like a slug or something, you could do that. I'm just doing this for ease of lookup, basically.
Yeah, I got you. I'm just still trying to figure out the data flow in this React, like where props come from and all of that. So
Yeah, some of it is just basically magic. So in our list view, we're actually getting all this information ourselves, right? So we're getting all this information from an API and we're changing our state. And then the props that we're giving to teaser, that's stuff that we have, total control over. So we're passing in props ourselves here. And then so we'll see here that getting the actual, so there would be ways, you don't have to do, there are ways to access the URL without using without using React at all and without using this library, but it's just it's just not as convenient. So this this hook is just, I just have to call it and then I immediately have access to all this stuff. I don't have to mess around with a bunch of stuff. So everything, including React itself, it's basically a convenience. You can do all of this directly using just HTML and JavaScript, but I don't know if that helps at all, but yeah, is it, I mean, do you have a specific question about props?
no, not at all. I'm just every time something comes up, I'm running it through my mind, just seeing if I can understand it. And that's why I asked that. Since you already had that prop title, we
Yeah,
could have passed that in instead of an ID, and
yes,
it would have matched it up when we looked it up because the title's going to be the same.
yeah, definitely. So we can just try that right now. So title. So we would probably want to rename the variable, but so here it's a very long URL, but that works as well.
Now, quick question on that. When the parameters function pulls that out, because now it's replaced all the spaces with the %20,
Yeah,
and then it tries to match that up in in the JSON file, would that be an issue? Or would it automatically reconvert that back?
So this, that's a good question. So if I pull this out using use params, I'm not actually, let's see what it console logged. Yeah, so it just does regular. So I think this is something probably that the browser is just doing. Adding these, the percent signs for spaces or %20 for spaces. So I'm not 100% sure, but I suspect that this is just the browser doing it rather than React doing it.
Okay, yeah, I understand that. I just wasn't exactly sure what React was grabbing, if it was stuff from inside React or if it's actually looking at the URL now and taking.
Yeah, I think ultimately it's actually looking at the URL. Because I mean, I can change it right here. So React has to be interacting with the browser. So you can access this stuff through just regular JavaScript in the browser. Okay, so we have this. I'm gonna change this back to just being the fake ID. And we'll go back to articles. Now if I go to particular article, so I'm going to the right route now. So I'm going to /1 and this is /3, but nothing's being displayed. So I'm gonna look at the detail view. Oh, by the way, yeah, it's been over an hour. Should we let's take a 10-minute break. And we'll come back and finish this up. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and reorient everyone. So what we're doing is we're making a very simple kind of article or blog, whatever application. And we want to have 2 routes, I guess 3 routes. The first route is just the home page, kind of default. The second is an articles page, a list view, and the third one is a detail view for a particular article. And to use routing in a React app, we basically have this, kind of fake, just fake router, not fake in a bad sense, but so we have to use this browser router. And then inside of that, this browser router can be placed anywhere where you want routing to matter in your app, which is probably going to be at the top level. So browser router, and then inside of browser router, we have routes. So that's just the boilerplate. And then you actually have the individual routes that you care about. And here you're going to provide basically a regular expression for the path. You can also use the colon syntax to tell it to strip off whatever comes after, and then give it a variable name, which will then be available for use in the use params hook, as we saw in the detail view. So use params.id, whatever we decided to call this. Yeah, I mean, any questions about what we've done so far? Okay, so we need to finish out the detail view. So I can see all my articles. If I go to a particular one, I have the URL is correct now, but I'm still just seeing this dummy stuff. So in detail view, because of how we structured it, we're gonna have to make another request to the backend. So what's the pattern for making an API request? The initial API request when the component loads.
Use effects.
Yep.
Asynchronous fetch.
Yep. So we have something that's going to change. So we need state, and we want it to change at particular time. So we're going to use effect. So we'll start with the state. So const. So we want this to be an individual article, not all of them, just one. And then set article. Then we have our use effect. Takes callback function. And we just want it to run when the page loads, so we pass an empty dependency array. This use effect, we're making an API call, which happens over the network, which means it needs to be asynchronous. So we have to call an asynchronous function here. And then make sure to actually call, well, actually do that later. Okay, so get article, it's actually going to be pretty much the same as this. So this is a little hacky. What you would do in real life, this is kind of just like basically a fake API. But if you wanted to fetch a particular article, you would have query parameters that's like article ID equals 1 or whatever you're passing in. Here we're just going to have to fetch everything, basically. Just it's just a limitation of the API, but that's not all that realistic. So ideally you don't want to just fetch everything and then sort it once it gets it. You just want to request the minimum that you need to minimize the amount of traffic, basically. It's just pointless to pass around a bunch of information that you don't need, but we're gonna have to do that here. The other issue is that this doesn't have an ID, so we're gonna have to kind of fake it. But all that aside, the basic pattern is the same. So we're gonna make our request. We're gonna we're gonna process that, and the body should be, as we saw, a list of article objects. And if we go to /articles/8, we're gonna want the eighth object, because the ID basically just is made up based on the index anyway. So we should be able to access that directly. So body, and then that will be whatever the params.id is. And once we have that particular article, we will change our state because we want the component to update. And when that updates, we're gonna render it here. So we'll get the particular article. So H2, that'll be, forget all the things that an article has, but article.title. What else do we have? Bunch of other stuff. Does anyone happen to remember any of the things we had available to us? I can just take a look. Author, we'll do author and content. Okay, we're gonna have to actually call this get article. So another issue is that we want to use this params inside of use effect, which basically means that this params is a dependency. So we need to make sure we include that here. It'll still work without it, but I think to make sure that everything stays in sync, you should include it because it is a dependency here. All right, so if I go to articles/8, so you can't read, yeah. So I have a problem here, which is that my initial render is trying to render article.title, article.author, blah, blah, blah. But when this initially renders, this is just undefined. So it's undefined title, so this is not going to work. So how do we handle a situation like that?
Is that using prevent default?
Okay, so prevent default is a method on the event object, and we basically use it for like submit actions and other things as well, but basically submit actions. So if you click on a button, you don't want the default refresh the browser kind of action. So that's a good thought, but that's not exactly what we need to do.
We need to set the article, right?
Well, so we are setting the article here. So
Oh, okay, not bad.
when this page first renders, so that initial render, this detail view is going to get to this return statement is basically it's going to try to render whatever it is in here.
Can we do a conditional in there that just checks if article is truthy?
Yeah. Yes. So that's what we're going to have to do, something conditional. So there's a couple ways we could handle that, but I think the simplest one is just to do a conditional. So if we actually have an article, then we'll render the article. Otherwise, we'll do something else. So if it's hard to remember, but this is just a function, right? This is just a function. So we can do kind of whatever we want in a function. So we're going to return this. Otherwise, we'll do else. Let's see. Go back here. Okay, so I've got some kind of issue here. Let me console log my article. Defined. I'm probably accessing this incorrectly. I'll console log. Okay, so I have to go to, okay, it's articles first. So body. Okay, so body.articles gives me that, and then my article is this. So my article, that, and then I'll set the state. So that should take care of that problem. It's just the reading the JSON issue. I go to 8. So I go back to the list view just so we can see this kind of in sequence. So I go to /articles. The API call goes out, pulls in everything, transforms it, creates all these article teasers with links, which have, link of whatever /52, /53. And if I actually go there, then it goes to whatever, it goes to the detail view. So the detail view is then going to render. So, for a split second, it should show this. And then once it's loaded, use effect will run. And when use effect runs, it's gonna make this API call. It's gonna parse through the JSON. It's gonna get the particular article that we want. It's gonna change the state, which is gonna trigger another re-render. And that, by the way, the information about the article we want is coming from this params hook. So whatever we put in the browser there, we're going to use as part of our query. It's going to change the state, which is going to trigger a re-render, and then article will be the actual article. And when it re-renders, this condition will be true. So the second time, on the initial render, it's going to be false. On the second one, it's going to be true because we'll have an actual article, and then it's going to return this JSX, which will have the article information in it. And the other route should still work. The home page /articles, get all of them, and then articles /36, I get whatever random article. Are there any questions about any of that?
I vaguely remember in the fetch requests, we used to do like a body.parse. What is that useful for?
Body.parse?
I think it's, yeah, I could be wrong. Does anyone else remember parsing something?
There's JSON. So there is a stringified JSON, and I think a JSON.parse. So if I did something like,
And it has something to do with when we were trying to use it with Python.
so let's do A1, 2. Oh. Stop this. See where I am. So here we go. So that's the stringified object, and then I think I can convert this into
You don't need to change your second stringified. You had a typo in the first.
okay. You can see I started with an actual object in, this is a JavaScript object. I stringify it, which basically converts it into JSON. And you can see that here, it might be hard to see, but notice that there are quotes around the keys here. that's a requirement, you know, double quotes around keys, that's a JSON requirement. So this is basically converting the object into JSON. JSON is a string, right? So it can be sent as bytes over the network. And then if I parse it, I can take a JSON object, which now stringified is, and I can turn it back into a regular object, which you can see here.
So when we were doing the fetch response.json, that was converting it to JSON for us from a string.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure exactly what happens here. I think partly it's converting different chunks. So it's processing different chunks of the request. So this is just the headers and this is the body.
Okay.
And
Makes
then
sense.
if I wanted to send something like, so I think if I wanted to send something like maybe as a post request or yeah, basically in the body of a post request, I would probably create an object representing that thing, whatever it is. And then I would have to convert it into JSON before sending it. Does that make sense? So, so what you do here is if I have my object here.
Yeah.
So if this were like, you know, a post request, maybe for example, so I have my here, so here's like some information that I want, username, password, and then I would do let's do potty, something like, let's see.
It's not gonna like body because you declared it above.
Oh yeah. Oh, sorry for all these terrible names, but creds, and then we'll pass in O, and then I would do like maybe I'll just do that here. That's a better example. But like, so remember when you send headers, for example. You could do like accept whatever, blah, 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 and we'll accept everything. And then you would do like grids, JSON.stringify. Oh, and then you would send this as part of the body of the request. So I think that's when you were seeing it before.
Okay. I get what you're saying.
Okay. Okie dokie. Yeah, I'll stop the recording.